Dear colleagues, let's continue our conference. Before we move to our next session, I will just remind you that the family photo will be sent to your email address as memento of this conference. In this session, we will discuss the EU aviation strategy. Achieving equal air connectivity for all the regions in Europe is another priority of the Estonian presidency. In the past years, Estonia and other smaller member states have made efforts to achieve high-quality connections with hub airports. However, there are still connectivity disparities between EU regions, which results in a significant competitive disadvantage. At the same time, exponential growth of air traffic in the heart of Europe has created new challenges for airports, air carriers, and legislators. The legislative environment must support sustainable growth and allow air carriers as well as airports to better meet the connectivity needs of local communities. Let me now introduce our distinguished speakers for this session. The first speaker is Mr. Hendrik Hololei, who needs no more future introduction. The second speaker is Mr. Pavel Telitschka, Vice President of the European Parliament, member of the Committee on Transport and Tourism, and rapporteur for the EU aviation strategy. The third speaker is Mr. Thomas Reinart, Managing Director of Airlines for Europe, Europe's largest EU airline association. The fourth speaker is Mr. Andris Matis, member of the Economic, Agricultural, Environmental and Regional Policy Committee of the Saeima of the Republic of Latvia, who was a Minister of Transport during the Latvian presidency. The debate will be moderated by Jan Palmér, who is a Vice President of the European Regions Ireland Association, also the Chairman of the Council of Nordica Regional Jet Airline, and who was also played an important role in Estonian aviation. Colleagues, just to remind you, you can sign up for the debate already. To register, as I said previously, press the head button only once for your conference unit. So, now I would like to warmly welcome our first speaker, Mr. Hendrik Hololei. Dear Hendrik, take the floor. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to address you again, now in a different capacity. And I have to say that it's far more comfortable to be here today than when I was here last time, which was about 16 years ago when I was the Minister of Economy and I had to answer some very tough questions from the parliamentarians. So things in life always go in circles. Sometimes circles get better afterwards. Anyway, so once again, most welcome to Tallinn. I'm sure you have had a great time already, and I'm sure that you're also going to enjoy the good discussions which were already started off in the morning. Transport services and connectivity are key elements for the European economy. And I think you also heard that very loud and clear this morning from the distinguished panel. Air transport is of particular importance in this context. And just a small reminder of facts and figures. A 10% increase of air connectivity stimulates the GDP growth rate by 1%. €1 value added in the air transport sector creates an added value of almost €3 for the overall economy. And one job in air transport industry creates more than 3 jobs in other sectors. The overall economic impact of the aviation sector in Europe is estimated to be around €620 billion, which is larger than the GDP, for example, of a country where I live now, Belgium. There are almost 2 million direct jobs in the sector, and it supports up to 9 million jobs. And European aviation is still globally very competitive and accounts about 26% of the world market. So I think that if not before, then these figures should convince that aviation matters a lot. Besides, this year is a very special year in aviation. It is the year of anniversaries for EU aviation. We are celebrating the 25 years of the European single aviation market, 15 years of the European Open Skies judgment that kick-started the EU external aviation policy, and we just celebrated 10 years of the signature of the EU-US Air Transport Agreement, probably the most important aviation agreement in the whole world. But I think the most important of these steps has really been the creation of the EU internal market, and I will come back to that. This is something which has brought millions of people to flying and made flying a household commodity. Aviation is a highly competitive and rapidly growing sector, which is also, of course, facing a number of challenges. The center of gravity of the global aviation is shifting eastwards. This is an inevitable process. We see that the real growth markets today are Southeast Asia. China is yet to come, but that is where the real growth is going to be generated in the next decades. And of course, the significant growth as a whole is generated outside the mature and currently dominating aviation markets, which namely means Europe and North America. Indeed, according to the Airbus Global Market Forecast, the Asia-Pacific region will lead the world traffic by 2036, multiplying by 3 the traffic servicing the region over the next 20 years. When comparing domestic traffic, the growth of Chinese market especially, of course, is expected to exceed by far that of the US market. So traffic growth 200% for China, 50% for US. Another sign of the shift to east is the expected growth of traffic between Europe and Middle East, which has been already growing very fast, with an anticipated increase by 150% in the next 20 years. So this just shows how global aviation is and how much the other regions who have been underdeveloped perhaps in aviation are going to catch up, and not only catch up, but are going to go further than the developed regions. Growth estimates are very strong, and that is also putting additional pressure on infrastructure, maintaining current unforeseen highest level of safety around the globe. Airport capacity is one of the most pressing issues facing European mobility today. Eurocontrol estimates that in 2035, 12% of the demand will be unaccommodated. 12%, as 19 key European airports could be saturated, meaning 237 million passengers will be unable to fly. So this is a real serious issue. Infrastructure investments, the same is actually happening in the sky as well when it comes to the congestion in the sky, congestion related to the provision of the air navigation services. The challenges we face are related to the performance in safety, security, sustainability, air traffic management and infrastructure, just to mention the most important ones. And this can only be met if we plan and if we are prepared to adapt to the new realities. And that is why the Commission also developed the aviation strategy for Europe, which was adopted in December 2015. We took there, for the first time, a holistic approach, which means that we need to see all the key partners of the aviation value network as equal partners generating profits and success. Aviation is not only about airlines, it's not only about airports. It is a combination of airlines, airports, air navigation service providers, but equally the aircraft manufacturers, avionics producers, even duty-free service providers, and so on. Everybody in this chain plays a very important role, and I forgot one extremely fast-growing and a high-value-added financial service also related to aviation, namely the leasing, because today already about 45% of the aircraft in the world are in service through the leasing arrangements. This year marks the 25-year anniversary, as I said, of the internal market, so some figures which are very interesting. Number of passengers traveling in Europe has grown from 360 million in 1993 to 918 in 2015, probably going to exceed 1 billion this year. Number of daily flights has risen from, and the world traffic today is slightly below 4 billion. Number of daily flights has risen from 10,000 in a day to today something like 26,000. This summer, on one day, first time ever in the European history, number of daily flights in Europe exceeded 35,000 flights a day. And so we have 7 times more intra-EU and international routes served by more than 2 carriers. In 2016, it was 732. Today, even more. 1992 was less than 100. So flying has also become cheaper than ever before, more environmentally friendly, and most importantly, safer than in the past. But we will get back to that. Cannot also rest on laurels, as we must continue to develop, improve and deepen the EU internal aviation market, deliver on the single European sky and tackle with the capacity and efficiency challenges we are confronted with. In order to do that, the Commission adopted an air connectivity package, which is looking at the issues like safeguarding competition in air transport, putting connectivity, competition and EU interest at the heart of its proposal. Connectivity is the key, I would say. Then, with the guidelines concerning the ownership and control of EU airlines and public service obligations, it's clear that, for example, the ownership and control rules are pretty archaic. It's it's basically the only industry in the world where you still have ownership and control rules. So that's also something which aviation, which is so global and so modern, has to get its regulatory framework up to the expectations of the 21st century. And of course also the guidelines related to the public service obligation, because let's be honest, they also do have a very important role occasionally. And then good practices for member states to improve their air traffic management service continuity in order to overcome traffic disruptions created by the air traffic management strikes. It's a very complex network. Figures speak again more than words. Between 2005 and 2016, more than 250,000 flights were cancelled due to the air traffic management strike, generating 9 million minutes of delay, impacted around 27 million passengers. So it's a complicated issue. There is also matters related to sovereignty. There are matters related to the right of strike. So we have to tread it very carefully. We can't legislate, we can't regulate, but we can come up with good recommendations. We can come up with best practices, and we can also put some peer pressure on the European level. And there are, of course, other important files which are being discussed. Airport Charges Directive, and I'm sure that my good friend Thomas will definitely drill much deeper into that, because that's an issue very much on the display by the airlines, where the airlines and the airports also do have quite a different view. But we are, as a regulator, we need to look into the matter and establish if there is an injury that needs to be rectified. We are also preparing the analysis of aviation taxes and levies, how they affect the aviation sector and the EU economy as a whole. As you are well aware, also the aviation taxes is a national competence. Nevertheless, they do have a network effect. And again, the Commission is in a position to be able to analyze the impact and also put together the comparative tables as well as best practices analysis. And also, finally, I'd like to mention something we're actually quite proud of, which is very new, if not to say brand new, but is now also available. Just 2 days ago, Commissioner Bulc presented to the ministers during the informal council here the connectivity index. This is a tool which could support policy choices for the future of regional connectivity and transport infrastructure development more generally. It's based on a concept that has never been modeled before, concentrates on the connections of regions at different level of granularity, and considers the journey as door-to-door instead of just linking airports and measuring the quality of this link. It's user-friendly because it uses easily understandable maps. It's online-based. It is robust data, however, it is developed to be modular for the future needs, such as, for instance, for the multimodal transport. So what we want to do, we want to extend it from aviation to the other modes of transport. High-speed train is the logical step for the future. And then, of course, to extension also to other world regions. And I believe it will be well used to better understand the matters of connectivity and can serve national aviation policies being improved. But, of course, it is not a silver bullet, I think. Lastly, let me just look at certain aspects of aviation that are always at the center of attention for policymakers and regulators. Safety. Aviation is all about safety. Safety always comes first. We are living times which we are experiencing the safest aviation ever, not only in Europe, but in the world. But something where we can never be complacent. The improvement in safety-related matters in aviation is constant. Proposal for a new aviation safety regulation aims at preparing the EU aviation system for the next 10-50 years by ensuring the highest level, of course, and also environmentally friendly air transport. The new aviation safety regulation is also integrating the use of drones, creating the first regulatory framework also for the drone market to start to develop, because that's clearly part of this digitalization of transport which is geared for the future. And We hope that this new aviation safety basic regulation, which is modernizing the current one, will be adopted by the end of this year, and we are very much counting on the good work of the Estonian presidency to deliver on that, of course, with the very close cooperation the European Parliament, because it's currently in the co-legislative process. Security. Safety and security, two sides of the same coin. They are equally important and essential for successful and credible air transport. Air transport, unfortunately, continues to be an attractive target to terrorism, so we must stay always one step ahead, and we have to constantly adapt to a whole new environment of potential threats. This is nothing new. We know that the security situation is quite tough for the moment, and aviation has always been a target. But it has been like that in the 70s and 80s. And we have a very robust aviation security system in place. Not a single security incident has been penetrating the current aviation security framework. All the incidents which have happened outside the secure perimeter, and mainly on the public zones, which of course doesn't mean that it is less important, but it just means that the aviation security as it is today guarantees us the highest level. And of course, we have to be ready for new challenges like the cybersecurity, which our policies already reflect, and we need to address it also in a comprehensive way. Third, environment. On aviation strategy, it's quite clear that the growth of aviation must go hand in hand with the sustainability policies. Aviation needs to obtain its license to grow through the measures that contribute to the sustainability and the reduction of carbon emissions. Last year, at the ICAO Assembly, historic deal, ICAO International Civil Aviation Organization, it's a historic deal for the reduction of carbon emissions was reached, and now we work hard in order to have the scheme also implemented in a most effective way, which also delivers the real carbon reduction and improvement to the environment, also to the air quality. And this is not the only thing, because a lot of it is also done by, for example, engine manufacturers. The new engines are much more environmentally friendly, much more efficient. Also the design of the planes, new planes are also much more environmentally friendly. So there is the technological development on one hand, there is the emission reduction on the other hand, and of course you have also the policy of the alternative fuels, even though today kerosene is the sole source, and the other options are still very limited. The biofuels, for example, the advanced biofuels which can be used and are being also tested and used in aviation are currently constituting less than 1% of the total use of the fuels. And now I come to an issue which is also something I will turn to you, the single European sky. This is a priority with high economic stakes, and we need to deliver on this also when we talk about sustainability of aviation. Every hour, 570,000 euros are wasted because we have not been able to make enough progress. In my 2 hours with you, it means 1.14 million, 5 billion a year. It's a lot of money coming from our pockets. And it comes at the expense of the whole aviation value network, and it's a source of further delays, fragmentation of airspace, and a great degree of inefficiency. On this issue, we need more commitment from the member states. It's in your hands to make progress here and make European skies more efficient and contribute to the improvement of the environmental performance. Clock is ticking and costs pile up every second. Every flight in Europe today is about 48 kilometers longer than it should. If you have every day 27,000 flights, you can take the calculator and calculate how much more fuel is burned, how much more CO2 is emitted. And that is because we have a fragmentation in the air. There is no problem for a truck to go from Tallinn to Lisbon, just crossing the borders. We even don't expect it to be different. How can it be different when the plane is flying? And why do we have borders there when we don't have the borders on the ground, and at the same time contributing to the inefficiencies of the European skies? The CESAR program, the technological arm of the Single European Sky, is one of the successes of it. Its solutions are helping to modernize our air traffic management through innovation, and it has made Europe the world leader in air traffic management modernization and will continue to do so through its ongoing deployment phase. Last words about the external aspect. Aviation is a competitive and global industry, meaning that we need robust, proactive, ambitious EU external aviation policy. We need to speak in one voice. The EU-level negotiations are an important step to create global aviation partnership that advance European regulatory solutions. We want others to take the same regulatory framework as we have developed, and also to open up new markets with new possibilities and potential. We have many EU-level agreements. Just I mentioned the US before, but we have also Canada, Western Balkans, Morocco, Jordan, Israel, Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, where the signature is still pending. And every of those agreements has been a success, opening up the markets, bringing millions, tens of millions of new passengers to both sides, but mainly to Europe, benefiting the European airlines, European tourism industry, people-to-people contacts. And currently we are expanding that. We are negotiated with very important partners like ASEAN, Turkey, Qatar, Tunisia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, just to mention a few, wanting, of course, to go further with countries like Mexico, China, and so on. The best way to engage with third countries is to create a predictable legal framework through the agreements. That is also how we can address problems and challenges that we face. So we aim to duplicate past successes, open markets on the basis of common rules in all key areas such as safety, security, air traffic management, fair competition, and also social aspects. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of going on in aviation. The Commission is taking a proactive approach to ensure that EU aviation can continue to be successful and globally competitive. I'm really looking forward to the discussion and, of course, your comments. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hollerheim. Thank you. It was very interesting overview. So, our next speaker will be Mr. Pavel Telitschka, who is Vice President of the European Parliament. Dear Pavel, the floor is yours. Please.
President, dear Sven, ladies and gentlemen, may I start by making a tribute towards the Estonian presidency. I think we can say, many of us, after 2 days in Tallinn, but also after a few weeks of the Estonian presidency, that the EU is in good hands. And in fact, if it were up to me, I wouldn't mind if Estonia would be holding presidency more often, because with the current experience, I think that is only positive. May I start a little bit outside the aviation sector, just for a second? It was 2004 when I was leaving the Commission, and once I left, my former colleague Jacques Barrot asked me whether I would not like to be one of the newly set up European coordinators for the TEN-T networks, for the TEN-T corridors. And my first response was, no, not really, because I felt that it's sort of a compensation for former commissioner. But I then asked, which of the corridors would it be? And I was told, well, I would appreciate if you would take care of Rail Baltica. And I asked why. And I got an answer, and after 1 day of hesitation, I agreed. And I spent, 7 or plus minus years on Rail Baltica. And I mentioned this case because it is an interesting case, not just in a railway, but we can find such cases basically in all modes of transport. If you look at the Baltic region, and in fact also the eastern part of Poland, basically the whole project is about integrating the Baltics and a part of Poland into the internal market of the European Union in transport terms. It is as easy as that. And in fact, I had an opportunity to take a train from Tallinn. That's really years back. Situation is quite different today. And only on the train you would realize, how absolutely key and vital the project and connectivity as such for these countries, but not just for these countries, really is. And I'm glad that Catherine Trautmann, that took over from me as coordinator, she's doing a great job. In fact, I think that she is more efficient, and the project is really in good hands. Now, aviation. After 2 days in Tallinn, we have heard a lot of speeches, a lot of contributions, dominantly positive, and rightly so. I think that today the EU transport policy and CEF as such, it is a success. In fact, it was really the previous commissioner, Siim Kallas, Estonian, that has put a solid basis to this new policy, and It is one of the policies where we really can say that the linkage between policy making on the EU level, on national levels, with financing, with investment, also with the private sector is well connected. Yeah, that's not always the case, and I think that in this respect, transport policy is one of the, let's say, very solid examples of benefits coming from European integration. But allow me to be maybe also a little bit critical, because I think we have heard a lot of positives, a lot of encouraging speeches, but let's have a look at the European Union of today and how it impacts transport and what does it mean to connectivity. I must say, and I do admit that I have not yet read the complete paper of the State of the Union for this year. I was present, I listened to the speech, and in fact, in comparison to last year, I must say that I liked it a lot. But if I would refer to last year, and I'm going to read this year still in detail, you know, there was a lot about financing transport projects, but you would have difficulties to find the word transport in the State of the Union speech of last year. What does it mean? I mean, is it by accident? I'm sure that colleagues from the Commission might eventually disagree with me, and I would say no, it is not. Regardless of, and notwithstanding really a great job that Violeta Bulc is doing, and also my good friend Henrik Hollolei, I have to thank him very much because he didn't leave too many issues for me to raise. I mean, it's so typical of him, but still I'll try to not be redundant, but make a few points. So regardless of this, really, I mean, I highly appreciate the work. The fact is that it is for many today on the European scene, transport and therefore connectivity not among the top priorities. Maybe many of you would disagree, but this would be my feeling. So there is certain room, certain space to cover, and there is a certain need for a progress. I mean, not to be just critical maybe of the European level, and I could also mention the European Parliament. I could mention presidency meetings of different political groups. And again, transport is not really the word that is most spoken in these meetings. I could also mention the national member states. I mean, at least those that I know well and the member state that I know best. And the fact is that, again, quite often it is a sort of narrow streamed at issues like, you know, building this motorway or that line and improving and upgrading this and that. So my point really here is, one of the reasons of the problems that we are facing today is a lack of strategic mindset years back. That's the issue. That's why we today lack certain connections. That's why we have connectivity gaps. That's why we sometimes lack financial means. That's why it is not necessarily connected also or has not been connected with other policy instruments and financial instruments. So let's acknowledge it. And I'm very glad that when the Commission, plus minus 2 years ago, came with a communication on the aviation strategy, that it outlined a strategic outlook. As it has been said on the own initiative report on the aviation strategy, I'm the rapporteur in the European Parliament, and I tried to build up on that. So my first point is lack maybe of certain political vision, lack of strategic thinking, and also if we speak of connectivity, then also the connectivity in policy making and in communication, both intra-member state, but also cross-border. And you don't have solid communication, you will arrive at problems that will arrive in the future. Now, if that is the case, then of course it has to somehow have implications for the budgetary allocations. And again, I don't want to go into detail, but I'm sure we could mention a number of member states where, in fact, you know, it's a daily fight, including mine, I think. I'm also looking at a Czech colleague. You know, the fact is that it's a daily or an annual fight for budget, while you should have a multi-annual outlook based on a strategy, and of course well elaborated and debated with your counterparts, at least in the neighboring countries. And I must say, back to Rail Baltica, it was not an easy ride because none of the countries, in fact, apart from a political maybe declaration at first, were keen on coordination. Each felt that it has its own priorities and it has to pursue its own priorities. And I think that the Baltics and Poland in this respect can be a very good example how the mindset can change quickly and what can that bring in real terms. Now on the aviation strategy and on connectivity. As I've said 2 days ago in the meeting with the ministers at the informal ministerial meeting, I had a few questions. One was, have we progressed in connectivity in the European Union? And the answer is yes, we have. Is there somewhere, let's say, connectivity crunch on the horizon? Yes, there is. I mean, in terms of capacity. Now, do we have, let's say, connectivity well established throughout the European Union? No, we have discrepancies. In some member states, the connectivity is better, in some member states less, and the same applies to region. Therefore, one can continue and say, is there something still wrong in terms of communication? Yes, there is. Have we always invested not just the national budget, but the EU funding appropriately? I mean, have we done really well if we have airports which are loss-making? And I'm not talking, by the way, about airports in remote areas where it is understandable. I'm talking about airports where in the radius of 200 kilometers you can find a number of international airports. Some of them are loss-making, and again, is it sustainable at long run? And that brings me to another point which is important, and again I would have a question. Have we managed well in terms of intermodality? And again, the answer is not necessarily. I mean, you have regions, you have countries where you've got solid connectivity between different modes of transport, but that does not apply en bloc. Again, the question to a number of these, the answer to a number of these questions is not just positive. And I think that this is what we as policymakers need to do. We need to be able to analyze it in a critical way and see, of course, what needs to be done, and now to create the opportunities for the market forces, because we are not there to construct it and just to design it. I mean, we are there to create the opportunities and to dismantle the barriers. And this is what the aviation strategy for me is about. Henrik has referred to the connectivity index. And I'll come back to the ministerial meeting, and you would see, let's say, different responses. None of them was really negative, but there were ministers from member states that highly appreciated it and would comment immediately on the individual aspects, and then there would be some that were looking at it rather from a defensive perspective. If we would have time, I think I would be able to demonstrate, based on those contributions, from which member state that minister comes and how well is that member state doing in terms of connectivity. It's an interesting picture that we could make. But the connectivity index for me, as I've said 2 days ago, or the day before yesterday, in fact, is an important tool for policymaking, and it is an important tool for optimizing investments and financing. And I think that this is how we should treat it. But, and I also made that point vis-à-vis Eurocontrol the other day, that the connectivity index at the moment, as the gentleman rightly said, for aviation has to go beyond aviation. Because if we are to be successful, then we need really a connectivity index of intermodal nature, because somewhere the flight connections makes a lot of sense, is economically viable. You have an opportune situation, but somewhere, I mean, you can manage with different modes of transport. I'm coming to concluding remarks now. As Henrik has said, the aviation strategy is very complex. I mean, it goes from questions like really connectivity in terms of the availability of routes, number of flight connections, planes, carriers, etc. That is, of course, absolutely key, and we need to create the environment for them, but that's just a part of it. The second issue is, how do you get to that airport? Yeah, I mean, you have to count the time that you get to the airport and again from the airport, the time that you spend at the airport. And by the way, the time that you spend also at the security checks in front of the airport. I mean, many of us have experienced after the terrorist attack in Brussels endless queues. And I don't want to, let's say, provoke it, but we cannot exclude that again in the future. So a part of aviation strategy, but also strategies of individual member states, we need to have also the question of safety and security taken care of. And then already you have an issue. Is it a question for the airport, which might be a private or public entity, or is it a question which is wider? Where should eventually the state and the EU invest the money in the infrastructure at the airport? For me, an issue high on the agenda, in fact, is the security around the airport. I mean, questions like profiling that the Israelis are very good at, and not only. So these are, again, the issues that we need also to focus at. Technologies. In the context, of course, of decarbonization, as Henrik Holloway has spoken about it, but not only. You can improve, of course, connectivity also with technology development, both in terms of the planes, you know, the range that they may be able to cover. That changes already the routes to a large extent, but also in terms of using the technologies in the clearance, etc., etc. The question is, for example, can we manage in the future something that the Canadians and the Americans have between some airports, that you have a clearance in Europe, a so security tight clearance, by the way, that every single half minute everyone knows where the passenger and his luggage is. And again, this is also about technology. So, ladies and gentlemen, the challenges are enormous, and we have added up another challenge, and that is Brexit. And I think that this is also something that we will need to reflect also in the strategy and its implementation. And the time is ticking, and in fact, over a year and a half, we should be in a post-Brexit, let's say, situation. The UK should leave, but nobody at the moment knows under what conditions, you know, in spring next year, you would be buying tickets for the year after. Something which is very genuine. Nobody knows that. So we really have enormous challenges. And for me, the way to tackle the majority of them is really a solid European cooperation based on the strategy that we have, put in place the legislation which is in the pipeline. I have not mentioned that, but I'm going to do that in one sentence. Also, the revision of the so-called 868, where, by the way, if you look at it, it's interesting because there are legitimate issues there in terms of concerns, but there is also protectionism that you run into. And I have not mentioned that, but I need to do that not just as a liberal, but I would say protectionism is always a dead end. It is a dead end in aviation. And the fact that 25 years ago we have liberalized aviation transport, that is the cause for the figures that we have today that Henrik Holloway has introduced to us. So final remark. My appeal would be to you as parliamentarians of member states to reflect on that and reflect that aviation today is a common issue, that building a single European sky, and what I have proposed in the aviation strategy, or the motorways of the sky, which of course comes to a very sensitive issue of air traffic control. I will not dwell on that, but starting from there all the way to infrastructure and connectivity, and what comes out of it, the figures that Henrik has mentioned, 10% increase, 1% GDP, these are common issues. And at the end of the line, it's the customer, it's the client that needs to benefit, whether it's business or whether it's just a physical person is rather irrelevant. And we have made mistakes in the past, and unless we will be able to understand that this is a common issue, and that my national policies and strategy have to take into account, have to reflect what we have agreed to on the European level, and then optimize financing and really, in other words, dismantle barriers, we will not achieve the potential that is there. And worldwide, we will be losing in our competitiveness and in competition. Because in the future, the European aviation market is not the market, is not the sole market and the primary market where we will grow. So we need to be competitive worldwide, and the implementation of the strategy is one of the ways how to achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Telička. I didn't want to interrupt you. It was really an impressive speech. So, before I give the floor to the next speaker, I just want to mention that you have possibility to register for debate. We have already one on the screens, but you have possibility to register now. So, our next speaker will be Mr. Thomas Reinhardt, who is Managing Director of Airlines for Europe, and as you see, Europe's largest EU airline association. And dear Thomas, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, dear chairpersons, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. It's of course an honor for me to be here to represent Airlines for Europe, as was already said by Henrik, the largest European Airlines Association. So we represent, with our members, the interest of the European airlines in Brussels. And I must say, I was very pleased with both Henrik and Mr. Telička's contents of speeches. Henrik gave you, in a nutshell, a very good overview of what issues are in Brussels in terms of aviation. And I'm very happy with that. I will try, therefore, to focus on three top issues that are, I would say, of main concern to the European airlines from a European perspective. It's not the only issues. I'm very happy to elaborate on other issues later on, but for the sake of time and efficiency, I will focus on three issues. As Henrik actually already said, the reason why flying in Europe has never been as cheap as it is now is because of liberalization, because of competition. Rightly so, the Commission this year made a big splash about 25 years of aviation. What it actually meant is 25 years of aviation moving towards a liberalized market, moving towards competition, moving towards better service, better safety, and also lower prices. To give you an example, actually the European Commission mentioned also on its slides promoting 25 years of aviation, of open skies, is the example of a family of 4 buying a return ticket from Milan to Paris back in 1992, that at a cost, the best possible cost of 1,600 euros. Today, that same family, for the same route, return ticket, best price would be 100 euros for all 4 family members. It's a very practical example. I know you could probably also talk about other routes. This is just one example from Milan to Paris, 2 wonderful cities, but you could do it for many other cities. So this is a clear example. As I'm sure many of you travel a lot, you see how prices have gone down. Now I come to my 3 points. My members are commercial businesses. So for them, in a competitive market, to keep the operations effective and cost effective and to keep the prices down for our passengers with a great service, they need to keep the costs down. And what this means is that we focus in Brussels on policies and regulations that could actually improve the cost structure for the airlines, or in a bad way, that could possibly threaten the cost structure of the airlines. And I will get to my 3 points. One, the competitiveness of Europe's airports and its charging structure. Henrik referred to it as the Airport Charges Directive. There is an Airport Charge Directive from 2009. I will elaborate a little bit on that. The second is the reliability of the air navigation services. And I think many of you, unfortunately, will have experienced delays caused due to air traffic management issues, caused to weather issues. But obviously, air traffic management, as soon as you're into the air, or even before you take off on the airplane, it's very important that it's managed in a proper way We would argue it's important that it's managed in a proper way and at an affordable price, again, to keep the cost for all of us at an acceptable level. And the third issue are the aviation taxes. I will just not try to duplicate what Henrik said, but it's obviously a national member state issue, and that's why I think it's important also to raise it here amongst all of you. And I have some interesting slides on that as well. So first issue, moving forward, this is an IATA slide, which we like very much. We work very closely with IATA every day, but we love this slide from them, so I thought let's copy this slide, ask for their permission. Basically, what this trend shows is, and we've done our own studies in A4E, we've commissioned a study in 2016, that over the past 10 years, in the 21 largest airports, so not all of them, the 21 largest airports, the airport charges, which is basically the fees the airport charge the airlines in order for us to use the airport infrastructure, but what you don't realize is they also charge you to use the airport infrastructure in the shops indirectly. Later about this a bit later. So airport charges have increased by 80%, and on the contrary, as you can guess, at the same time, the net airline fees in Europe have dropped by 20%. So you see this slide shows an interesting trend. It continues to go on. Hopefully it will flatten out at some point of time, or these two will actually come together. So of course our ambition is to make sure that these two trends come a little bit closer together. In other words, that the airport charges, and I'm not talking again about all airports, but airports that actually, which are known today across Europe that have market power and abuse that market power in order to charge horrific airport charges to airlines. So we need to do something about the situation. We hope to do that with the help of Henrik and his team. We've been working with DG Move and Commissioner Bulc for quite a while on this, including, of course, with the airport representatives. And you can imagine, of course, this is one thing we don't agree upon, airports versus airlines. But I hope that we can come to some conclusion, a recognition that a certain amount, between 10 and 20 airports, let's say, the list is known here in Europe, actually have monopoly, quasi-monopoly positions, and they need to be regulated. It's as simple as that. I know it's a hard nut to crack. I know many of your governments have a stake in some of these airports, but it's simply not fair that the airlines and the passengers, therefore, including yourself and your families, have to pay, continue to pay for all the costs, and that we are the only, truly only sector truly liberalized in the aviation value chain. This is the situation today, and it's not fair for the passengers, it's not fair for the airlines trying to survive in a very competitive market in Europe. A couple of things maybe on the Airport Charges Directive. What is really disturbing is that what it was trying to do is to deliver meaningful consultation and effective transparency in setting the charges. Typically, in some countries every year, but say on an average every 5 years, an airport would actually go to our members and say, you know what, for the next 5 years, airport fees, charges are going to up by 5%. And we ask, why? Well, tough, this is what it is, and here are the numbers. Now, when you look at the numbers, in a lot of cases, actually most cases, it's not transparent. The numbers do not explain us where the 5% increase comes from. On which basis are these airport charges being charged, being calculated? So there is a real problem, the fact that an airport can just get away with it, again, because of its market power and its very powerful situation in the market. It needs to be regulated. The directive actually has failed to prevent the predetermination of charges, as I said, through concession agreements. I know, let's be realistic, many of these airports have concession agreements, which are long-term, typically 20, 30 years or more. And it's a hard nut to crack, because that's going to be part of the discussion. If you're going to economically regulate, if you wanted to do that, you have to take into account these concession agreements as well. How do they calculate? How do they play in the calculation of the charges? I believe that at least in Brussels, I think it's quite clear that the current Airport Charges Directive has been widely recognized not to be effective, not to be properly implemented, and that is not the fault of the European Commission. Implementation is a member state issue, so the European Commission needs to play its role there as well. But it's been recognized that there is something wrong. Even some of the member states have admitted to us and publicly have said, the national regulators, we need to do something. So I think it is time to do something and really to convince, start with those member states where we see the biggest problems with the airports to do something about it. So it's now up to the European Commission, and Hendrik gave some encouraging words, really to move forward quickly, decisively, and to allow for the European Commission to propose economic regulation, because, again, let's not be naive, the European Commission, I believe, has very good intentions, has very good information from all parties, but the member states need, of course, to agree with the principle that we have some issues here and there, and I'm talking about a minority of airports, not the 450 airports, for God's sake. Most airports are doing great, and we do very well with them. They're great partners. But to move forward quickly, decisively, and to allow for this European Commission, not the next European Commission, this European Commission to propose economic regulation, to allow for the regulation of the real bottlenecks, as I said, and to move forward. Why, again, just to take a step back, why is this such a big issue for us? It's not a new issue, but economic regulation is increasingly important for us to regulate airport charges, because airport charges can take up to 20% of the cost of an airline operation, 20%, which of course will translate in the ticket of the price. So a high cost of the price, which you see today, are airport charges. It's not always transparent, but I can guarantee you, you're paying to use airports, not only the gates, which would make sense, not only the fact that you're on a plane that runs on runways, that makes sense, but you're also paying for the space of the shops, the parkings, and the hotels in many cases. Does it make sense that you have to pay for it because we have to raise the ticket? I'm not too sure. So I think time for reflection, I would say for action. The next point, as I said, cost-efficient European airspace, and it is what it is. We are a global business, so we are certainly a European business. We are not a national business. All of our airlines cross the national borders more than other modes of transport we have discussed today and over the past couple of days. Hendrik referred to a study that the European Commission had issued. We had done our own study basically with the same conclusions. We brought it out last year. The numbers, I wanted to show the slide because it's quite educational for all of us. This is according to the PwC study that we had commissioned and of which the results were clear last summer. Over the past 7 years, air traffic control strikes, or let me correct myself, the disruption caused by air traffic control strikes, which actually means the extent to which some countries in Europe are not able to cope with air traffic control strikes and to provide a real minimum service, not on paper, but a real minimum service. In reality, to protect overflights, flights that have nothing to do with that country being on strike, to put it that simple, are affected. Overflight is a European problem. So if one country located, and you see a couple of countries, and the darker the countries get, the more ATC strikes you have. So if you need to fly because of the organization of the European air navigation space, you have no choice but to fly of that country. If you cannot do that because of strikes, in some of the cases, on one day, some of our members need to cancel up to 80% of their flights. Cancel, not delay, cancel. And that's because of a strike in one country, which happens to be in the center of the European airspace, unfortunately. Otherwise, I probably would not be discussing here in front of you today. So huge disruption caused by one particular country. And again, for reasons I can understand, it is very sensitive because we are talking about the rights of strikes. Actually, we are not talking about the rights of strikes. We're talking about looking, as Hendrik alluded to, looking how other countries in Europe are dealing with this in a very effective way. Again, 95% of the countries in Europe, whenever there is an air traffic control strike, for whatever reason, people have the right to strike, that's not the issue. But 95% of the countries in Europe are able to deal with it. And they tell us in advance, 72 hours in advance, for instance, look, there's going to be a strike, prepare yourself. We prepare ourselves, it costs us money, but at least we are able to reroute the flights. We're able to tell you, don't come to the airport because we will have a strike in this country and it will affect your flight to Portugal, for instance, when you're traveling from the UK or the north, or whatever. We can warn you in advance, we can reroute, you can rebook your hotel, you can rebook your restaurant. But if you cannot do that, if they don't tell us, and our number is 72 hours, so 3 working days in advance, then we're really stuck. And if we hear about the strike 48 hours in advance, sometimes we need to take proactive measures, because we do not want to take the risk that you end up at the airport and the flight might be cancelled, might not be cancelled, maybe delayed for 1 hour, 3 or 4 hours. So then we have to cancel proactively, and that's not good either. So it's mostly about better predictability and putting practical measures in place that already exist, but are simply not being implemented. So this is about political will, and that's why I'm very happy I stand here in front of you. It's about political will, not necessarily about new legislation, about political will. So if we could have this minimum improvement of political will and putting in place what already exists in other member states, look at the best practices the Commission is promoting, we'd be extremely grateful. And I think when I say we, it's all of us, because we're all flying, and at some point of time, we are being affected by cancellations and delays because of this. I talk about this type of disruption. I could talk about weather-caused disruption. In both cases, airlines do not control this. If it's about strikes, because I'm going to get the question anyway, if it's about strikes of crew or pilots, that is our problem, and we need to take care of it. That is our responsibility. But this is not our responsibility, unfortunately. So we are counting on you, on the member states, on the national parliaments, and on the ministries of transport, and on the national air navigation service providers to make it work. One of the interesting ideas that Mr. Telička has been promoting is the motorway of the sky. Now, the motorway of the sky is, I would say, a simplified term for a very complex technical dossier, but a very interesting one. I hope we can make it work, Mr. Telička, and I know the Commission is looking into this. It's also in your communication. It would basically mean that it would be possible for overflights, so the upper limits of the sky, to guarantee a continued service, technologically speaking. So technologically speaking, a lot of that is possible today. Again, it would require political willingness for the national government in question to allow for other air navigation service providers of the neighboring countries to take over that traffic. Of course, they have to train their people, but that can be done, to take over the traffic temporarily if there are problems. Today, it is not allowed for political reasons, but it becomes a European problem. To me, it is a problem of basically affecting the liberty of movement of the European citizens. So, you see the numbers there on the slide. I talked about the $12 billion of loss of revenue over 7 years, affecting about 140,000 jobs. The one more interesting thing on this slide is that I am standing here in front of you representing the airlines and the passengers. But let's not forget that most of the impact of these, the disruption caused by ATC strikes, the sector is a sector of tourism. I know that in this case, many of you from Southern Europe, countries like Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, Malta and Cyprus, where actually you need more jobs. These disruptions also impact the job creation or the loss of jobs because of these strikes. I mentioned 140,000 jobs, that's over 7 years in the whole of Europe. It's not only in Southern Europe. But obviously you can imagine around the holiday periods, Easter period, beginning of holiday periods, switchover of holiday periods, when these strikes take place, it is affecting, of course, the tourism sector big time. That's the economic cost. And, well, I'm sure, unfortunately, you will have experienced it. I hope not too much with your own families when you're traveling, when you've had cancellations due to these disruptions or these type of disruptions. But, of course, there's also the social cost. Again, I think I'll conclude on this point that we're very happy that the European Commission has been able to put things on paper in its communication, open and connected, back in June, and we will be using this, of course, as a tool. Again, it's not about binding legislation, but as a tool to further educate your colleagues in the member states about national issues having a European impact. The third point, third and last, is taxes, and yes, of course, it is a national competence. We do appreciate the European Commission's effort to list the best practices. It's an effort currently ongoing, I understand. We are currently conducting a study, again with PwC, of which we will see the results very soon. This is just a high-level overview of where we see the biggest impact. So just looking at the numbers, But one important number, I think, to take away from here for you maybe is that last year, basically the passengers paid 5.6 billion euros of taxes in addition to the net airfare price. And you can see it very often on your ticket. I talked about airport charges. This has nothing to do with airport charges. This is a tax coming from national government. They can be called environment tax, could have all kinds of different names, but it's a tax that is directly added to the ticket, to the price of a ticket of a passenger. And it can vary from country to country. It depends whether you're traveling economy, when you're traveling business, or the distance you will be flying. The winner there, unfortunate winner there, is the UK with the APD, which is, I would say, milking the most the European passengers. I think this is, this is a very informative slide, lots of detail there. What we will try to show is in countries such as the Netherlands, Ireland, I mean, the good examples are very few, but where they basically abolished the aviation tax. Why did they abolish the aviation tax? I think in the Netherlands, in less than 1 year, after 10 months, they realized that actually introducing the tax was costing them more than actually the revenue they were going to get or the gains from the tax. Because of the traffic of passengers, which went down tremendously, had an impact on the local economy, actually on the Dutch economy. People were flying from Düsseldorf, from Brussels, good for Brussels, good for Düsseldorf, I would say, but not so good for Schiphol, not so good for the Amsterdam area and the Dutch economy. So the Dutch government abolished it. The Dutch legislation is still there, but it says €0, which is very helpful. Irish, same story. I think in 2014 they abolished the tax for the same reasons. They saw it was counterproductive. Austria is aiming towards a reduction of 50% of the aviation tax for the same reasons, because it has huge negative economic impact. So we will be looking, I would say, contacting those member states that are fierce and still want to stick to the aviation tax, but you can understand it is, again, adding direct cost. Again, happy to talk about other issues, questions on other topics you might have during the debate. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Reinhardt. Again, it was very interesting, and I didn't interrupt. I'm not a good chair because time is quite tough. But anyway, let's go forward, and I'm delighted to give the floor to Mr. Andris Matis, my colleague from Latvia. And Andris, the floor is yours. I hope you will manage with 7 minutes. Is it possible? Okay, let's see. Please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, I also would like to thank Estonian presidency for organizing such a very interesting event to discuss transport policy issues. And Estonia and Baltics is one of the regions where those transport policy issues and transport connectivity issues are very important, because we are a remote area, and there are only some means how we are integrated in the European market. Nevertheless, we are members for more than 10 years in the EU. But Mr. Hole and Mr. Telička said very much on all the aspects of European aviation policy, and I would like to just discuss on the two of the topics. I think it's very important, especially for our region, and those are connectivity, and the second one is competitiveness. So the first on the connectivity, I've already mentioned that the Baltic region, for example, is very remote in the sense of connectivity. So we are well connected with Russia by the railway. Also, the electricity grid is very well connected with Russia, so we are now working on there has been open link between Estonia and Finland and Lithuania and Sweden, but still the lot of market is connected with Russia. So we don't have any high-speed motorway to European Union. So now we have decided, and thanks to Mr. Telička also, about the Rail Baltic, and we are now constructing high-speed railway, but it will take some 10 years at least to be operational. So the only way how we are connecting to the rest of the Europe is aviation, and that's very good that the price for the flights and price for the tickets and all the statistics that were showed has dropped significantly. That means that we have very good possibilities to travel, but connectivity means also efficiency of connectivity. So that means how many direct connections between Tallinn and the rest of European capitals do you have? Riga has a little bit better situation, but that is very important for the development of business. That is very important for the tourism and for the people feeling really integrated in the European Union. So, and that means we have to do something about how to promote this connectivity and how to deal with that. If we look at, for example, of issues of state aid, there are very strict issues of state aid in the European Union, and Estonia and also Latvia has very much so how it works. So it's not so easy. So you have to shut down your airline. We had to cut significantly our operations to comply with the state aid issues. The same applies also to state aid issues to the airports. It is also not very easy to have investments in the airports, especially a little bit larger airports. If to compare with the average European airport, then Riga Airport, for example, has 5.2 million. It's very small, but still it applies all the European state aid rules. So that means that it is very important that we not only look at the competition point of view of law, but also from the point of view of connectivity, because we don't have any alternatives. And that's good that travel alternatives below 500 kilometers is better, of course, to use the high-speed train. But if I'm not missing the train between Tallinn and Riga, which is about less than 300 kilometers, takes about 12 hours or something like that. So it means it's useless connection. So basically, you can not use this. So the airline it takes about I don't know 30-40 minutes. Yes, the connectivity is very important, and the second thing I would like to mention, that is competitiveness. And nevertheless, we are the small countries. We have, Latvia particularly has very big impact on the economy of the aviation business. So we have calculated it's about 3% of GDP that delivers the air services. Also connected services, airlines, airport, tourism agencies, and all the air traffic controllers and all the connected facilities. So it brings real benefits to our economy. And of course, the internal competitiveness rules in the EU has set up the level playing field that everything is open, market is open, you can fly whenever you want, and the rules, everything is harmonized. But the problem is outside the EU. If we look at international carriers, which are third countries carriers, they have free access to the European market, basically with very limited restrictions. But the European carriers lack those access to other countries. And that means that the shift for intercontinental flights moves from European capitals to outside European capitals. So like Dubai and others, which provides very cheap flights, and the European airports are losing the competitiveness battle. We even have now advertisement to travel to Washington through Moscow because it's cheaper and easier. So they have free access to our market, but we can't use those possibilities and options. So the competitiveness we have to think about, and I know that Commission is working very hard with agreements with the third countries to set the level playing field, but it is very important for the development of the industry and for the connectivity connectivity for our citizens. So there are many other things that to discuss in aviation sector, but I can say that all transport modes and all transport issues have to be looked at complex and have to be looked at one general transport scheme. And Commissioner Bulc today also informed us about the strategy of the Commission for that. And I think that in our common efforts, we can achieve the good competitiveness of aviation, railway transport and road transport, maritime transport, and this synergy will give us, for the whole Europe, will give us more competitiveness and will bring our region to the highest growth rates. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mattis. Four very interesting overviews. So, colleagues, now we move to a panel discussion. I'm glad to give over to Mr. Jan Palmér, who is, as I said, quite often helps us here in Estonia. So, Jan, what are your thoughts in European air connectivity? Please give your thoughts and take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I should, it has been a lot of interesting information, and time flies, as they say in aviation. So I will shorten down my little speech, because most of the things are already said. And I think Mr. Hollolay summarized it in a very simple way. Aviation matters a lot. So with all these kind of things we have in front of us with the challenges trying to meet the future requirements and improvements we need to do in the business, there is a lot of work, of course, to do when it comes to safety, infrastructure, air traffic management. Everything is said. Environment, single European sky. And then we come to the point of connectivity. And before I came to Estonia, I was working in Sweden, most of the time Sweden and Denmark. And the north of Sweden, they have connectivity problems. Not definitely to Europe, first of all, but just to get down to Stockholm is a problem. So I've been working in regional operators all my life, which means that these kind of problems with connectivity is essential. I do have a lot of experience from that. As soon as an airport couldn't supply any more flight services from different destinations in Sweden, the community area started to die. Companies were moving from the area to other places and so on. So it affects us whatsoever. So we need better connectivity. But before we start any kind of discussion here, I would like to add a few things where I think and I've been in this business for 30 years, and I'm not a politician, I'm an operational guy, and I've seen a lot. Then one decision was taken to create the EASA organization. And this is a little bit of criticism now. We're talking about huge challenges for the future, but we haven't even solved the small ones. We took a decision a long time ago. We were promised that when EASA was organized, the local national CAA will disappear. And we would have one system in Europe, which everybody wanted. And nothing has happened. We have both now, which makes it enormously complicated especially for smaller airlines, who doesn't have all the personal resources to handle all these issues. We can't even move an aircraft between two countries in Europe without creating an enormous problems with the CAA and also. It takes time. Another thing is that different kind of organizations are actually auditing us to death at the moment. We are audited by our national CAA, by EASA, by IOSA, by Lufthansa CARA system, by every airline we are operating with. And I can see that all my people working in, with these kind of safety auditing, they are more thinking about what kind of answer would they like to have, because we want to pass this audit. So no, people have stopped thinking about safety as such. And this is a danger for the safety in the future. This is an important issue, and I agree with the speakers that safety and security is, of course, absolutely top priority for the whole business. But right now, we have to change the system because it's on the way, it's on the wrong way. We need one European safety agency in Europe. We don't need all these national ones. Another thing where we haven't been able to work as one European organization is the background checks. I don't even know if you know what it is. But if I want a technician to work on an aircraft, an Estonian technician to work on an aircraft in Copenhagen because we have a project there, he needs a background check. He has already done it in Estonia, and he is cleared. But to get him into Copenhagen, to get like a little card so he can get in to work, can take up to 2 months. Because it goes back to the border police or whatever it's called in it. So every national authority are making their own security checks, background checks. Why can't we have one system where we do a European check and all our crews are certified to get into any airport anywhere in Europe? This is another thing. These are small things but means a lot for the airlines. There are a lot of other problems also, and I won't go too deep into them, but one area where we, since I am working in this European region airlines, we have a lot of smaller operators all around Europe, and many of them are already doing connectivity work because we are feeding in from smaller countries, smaller destinations into the central of Europe. But we are feeders in many cases, which means that this passenger is going to go with another flight from a hub. The EU 261 passenger rights has started to become an enormous burden especially for the smaller airlines, because we are feeding in and we have to pay them like a penalty. It's not the face value of the tickets. It's like 3 to 4 times the average revenue we get per ticket. So it causes an enormous burden, and we cannot. Even if it's the airport's fault, there is no way we can send the bill to the airport. They just don't pay. So the whole 261 system today is a disaster, in my opinion. And it has started to become risk capital companies going into this business. They fly in, if we have a cancellation, they fly into the airport and they start to talk to the passengers that we can take care of your claim to the airline, and they take only 30% of the money. So this is super business now for lawyer companies who are dealing with this. And I don't think that was the intention. The intention of 261 was to get rid of the overbooking problem, which Madame Palacio caused her a problem once when she was traveling from Spain up to Brussels. But now it's a super business for companies outside the aviation industry, and I don't think that was the intention. It's already been said about access to major hubs. This is already a huge problem because for a smaller operator with smaller aircraft to get into any of the major hubs is definitely already impossible. We cannot get the slot times we would like to have. Or if we get one, it's so expensive so we can't afford to fly there. So this is already a huge problem, especially for the smaller operators. Another problem which has been on TV for a couple of days now is the recruiting and training of flight crews and technicians, especially technicians actually. We need to support this in enormous development, as we have heard from the figures. We need to be more efficient, to get pilots and technicians trained and schooled somewhere. And for the smaller operators, it's a problem because we are the ones training them now, and then they move on to bigger airlines very fast. And this is, of course, an enormous cost for a smaller operator. PSOs, yeah, PSOs works pretty okay from a national point of view, but it's the regulation as such today makes it pretty complicated if you talk about PSOs on an intra-European level, because you can always go to another destination some different way and so on. And we already heard about the state aid regulations, which is a little bit, for a small country on the outskirts of Europe, it's not so easy to run an airline operation needed because of the connectivity, but the regulations today are so strange, so it's really hard to use them actually. So there is something we have to think about. I think I will stop there to save some time because we are very close to 1 o'clock, but I think we have got a little bit more time. So we have time for your questions, of course. Huh? I will do the same as Mr. Holloway. I will, because I'm really interested in this issue, I would like to put the first question about connectivity. There will be a connectivity index, but I'm really interested in how is it going to be used. If the index is low, which it will be if we take Estonia or Latvia or Ireland, or if we don't have aviation, the index will be pretty bad, I think. So, which means that if we have such a situation, what will you do to be able to get that index to a par then? Is it state aid regulations, is it PSOs, or is it national things, or is it EU? How would you like to, can you tell me exactly what we can expect then? Mr. Holloway, would you like to start?
With pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jan. And I think that during my presentation, I already referred to also to the aspects related to the connectivity index, which could be used. It is a policy tool, but you know, life would be very easy if you would just, if we would all live in a real world like in mathematics. You just put numbers into some equation and then you get the result, and that is the ultimate truth. The connectivity index, unfortunately, is not going to work in that way, that once you put the variables in and this result is then automatically granting some kind of policy that would allow you or not allow you to do things. But it is a very useful tool in order to give you the comparative understanding of where you stand, in order to feed into your national aviation strategies, and also to be available for the European decision makers and regulators to that respect, to devise the strategies and policies that we are going to take place, or to that respect as well, for example, when we are making the modifications to the PSO rules, for example, to see, and I very much agree what you said that the PSO works very well on a national level, but when we talk about the intra-European PSO, then it is becoming more complicated. Of course, at the same time, you also have to show that there is a certain market injury that you are trying to fix with this, and even that is not so self-evident in a very open market where you can basically fly from point to point any time that you want. But of course, there are more profitable and less profitable routes, and I think that the less profitable intra-European routes where you don't have much competition, it can be also something which would help to boost the connectivity. So try to be short in that sense. It is a tool, it is one additional element, but this is to helping to feed the policy making and give you the comparative situation related to the other countries in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we start on the question list, debate list. Mr. Mustafa Ilshali.
English. I thank you. And we are speaking about how we can increase the cooperation between different actors. And when we speak about European numbers, when it's 5% and Turkey is 14%, and maybe a decade earlier, Turkish airlines were making flights to around 50 points, but now Turkish Airlines is going to become, or it became, the number first airlines in Europe, and it gives a really huge number of passengers within last years, and if we speak during the last 25 years, and in different places are concerned, which gives a so we are speaking about places which are flying through Istanbul to different places, and I think that it's important, like the role of for Turkish aviation, is important when we speak about European policy. And when we see that Turkey has a huge potential, but then now it's not given a right place within the landscape, and this is my point.
Comment that?
I would, with pleasure. Thank you very much for the remarks. Turkey is an important partner in aviation also for the European Union, and in order to I would say deepen this relationship, we started the negotiations on the comprehensive air service agreement between the European Union and Turkey last year. And so far, 3 negotiations rounds have taken place, and the next one is going to take place later this year. And I think this is the best possible framework in order to lay down the main fundament for the EU-Turkish aviation relationship. And that would also mean that Turkey is converging its regulatory framework when it comes to safety, also on security, and we are also creating a possibility to settle the disputes in the form of the joint committee. So I think that this is a positive development. I'm very encouraged also with the way the negotiations have taken off. It's been constructive. There are difficult things to discuss, but negotiations are never easy. So I'm optimistic that in the end we would be able to come to a solution. But of course, there are specific issues also which concern certain EU member states, and these issues also have to be addressed in the context of these negotiations and will have an impact on the final outcome of the negotiations as well. But it is very true that the EU and Turkey are strong partners in aviation, continue to do so. Turkish Airlines plays an important role in the European market, and Turkey is also actively participating in Eurocontrol as well as an observer in EASA. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to... that's okay. Then we go to the next question, and that's Mr. Peskis.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, before I became a politician, I was an engineer. I was constructing machines. With great interest, I followed the developments in the EU and how EU was imposing further restrictions on combustion engines while trying to protect the environment. The same goes for electricity generation. Filters systems, or systems that allow us to recover heat, are as big as the furnaces in which we burn the fossil fuels. In aviation industry, not much has changed. The turbines that lift airplanes into the air are not equipped in any systems for filtering fuels or any other devices that allow us to protect better the environment. We have already introduced solutions that made road and rail transport cleaner. And now what I've heard here is that you are willing to invest in technology that does not have any measures mitigating the environmental impact. Isn't it consistent with the general strategy of the EU with regard to clean fuels?
Mr. Holliday again.
Thank you very much. It is a very good question, but I totally disagree with you. And why do I disagree with you is that, first of all, the aviation industry has done significant steps also in order to mitigate the CO2 emissions of the industry. And I also refer to the agreement that was struck last year in the ICAO General Assembly, and which basically is foreseeing the carbon neutral growth starting from next couple of years. But that is not the only thing. And I also said it's a basket of measures which is undertaken. Last year also the ICAO agreed on the CO2 standard, the CO2 standard for the new aircraft, which is also having a significant impact in terms of reducing the CO2 emissions from the aircraft engines and also trying to make the aircraft more environmentally friendly. This has been a step which has also been applauded by the environmental organization and definitely a step to the right direction. The last element, which I also referred to before, is concerning the alternative fuels. And I very much hope that there will be more sustainability as well as more availability when it comes to the aviation fuels. The problem today is that there is a certain security of supply that is not delivered when it comes to the available advanced biofuels, which could be easily substitute kerosene. You have the possibility today, for example, in Oslo Airport, for some airlines who are testing that, and it works perfectly well. But for the moment, of course, it is also an issue about the price. It's also an issue about the technology, and it's also an issue about being able to produce it in large quantities. But clearly, advanced biofuels are one of those types of fuels which would be the only liquid element that can replace kerosene in the foreseeable future. And I think that what the EU is doing, it also needs to do more in terms of supporting the research and the availability of the biofuels, which would be the third component in order to reduce the emissions. So yes, aviation needs to do more. It has to earn its license to grow. But on the other hand, there are elements in place, and we just need to be there to monitor that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Then next on the list I have Mr. Marco Filippi.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor again. Airport hubs of company airlines are important economies of scale in order to save costs and increase profits. But this is not always combines with the best connections possible in all countries, and very often they generate traffic congestion. But there's also a question of flight security, considering the more and more stringent competition between carriers. And so what is needed is more attention on those who control this aspect, and also the cost dynamics question, as already somehow preempted by Mr. Palmer. Wouldn't it be better to give ourselves a single European control authority
connecting member states and controlling on the basis of higher and higher standards both airline companies and airports? And has attention been given to the costs and efficiency when strikes happen, strikes that are always not often controlled in terms of the impact they produce? So don't low-cost airlines have the opposing problem? They say that the salaries of workers in the airline field are very low and the salaries are compressed. So what are we about to do in this respect?
Mr. Teletsky.
Thank you. From my point of view, on the first part of your remark and question at the same time, I absolutely agree. The problem is, and I have witnessed it when I came with the impetus of the motorways of the sky, I mean, that was the moment where the real political lobbying basically across the political spectrum in the European Parliament occurred, and especially, let's say, among the political groups more to the left. So this is a politically sensitive issue, and the solution or resolution of the problem, in fact, lies with the member states. If we would manage, to understand, and we don't have to analyze the issue, I mean, the analysis is clear. If we would be able to understand the positive implications of a real single European sky, of one air traffic control, and we would understand that primary objective is not to touch people's, let's say, social standards, the right to strike. That's not the issue what that is about. But there may be any disruption of air traffic, and you need to address it. I mean, if you don't address it, you can calculate what redirecting of planes means, cancellation of planes. If you calculate it in terms of economic implications, it is enormous. And it is also enormous for the airliners. Mr. Moderator, I don't know whether I would have 1 minute for quick reactions on some of the previous points very briefly, because you have asked whether PSOs and state aid is let's say, a way to proceed with all the, let's say, the downsides, yes, but I would also look at it from the other perspective. I mean, we are seeking, and that's why I've spoken about the index being multimodal. We are speaking about enormous investments which are being made from EU funding, and a lot of the investment, like it or not, is wasted. And I think that at a certain moment, the European institutions should have the courage to say, okay, if the connectivity index is that good, and you are still applying, regardless of what is the mode of transport, well, I will reflect it. I don't think that that should be, let's say, the project that I would be financing from European money. I would rather focus where the, let's say, connectivity index shows, let's say, low levels. And final remark on Turkey, I fully agree with what Henrik has answered to your question. But I, as a politician, will go a little bit further. And I would say that for me, the relations between the EU and and Turkey in the future lie exactly in the area of these specialized sectorial bilateral agreements, including aviation, because I don't see, honestly, and I'm sorry for that remark, but I don't see the question of Turkish membership really on Turkey. It is derailed, and I think that it will still derail. But that does not mean, and if you say that the Turkish airlines are #1 in Europe today, that is also because what the environment, what the regulatory environment today is in Europe. And the Turkish airlines are profiting from that. And I think that we need to just tackle the issues which are subject to negotiations on the aviation agreement. I'm sure that is in the interest of both parties, and we will manage.
Mr. Holle, you had a comment?
Yes, a quick one. Well, the #1 airline in Europe is Ryanair by far, with 120 million passengers in 2016. So I think that's at least statistics. And you also made the reference to the low-cost airlines. Actually, we haven't observed that the low-cost airlines are paying anyway less. They are paying generally the industry average. And I think that there is a lot of myths around the low-cost airlines. They do provide the connectivity. They have impeccable safety record in Europe. And just one of the studies made by Consumer Protection Agency of one of the member states actually observed that, for example, in terms of paying out the compensation, Ryanair was doing much better than, for example, one of the large legacy carriers of Europe. So I think that the low-cost carriers have a very, very important place in the European aviation market, but we need to observe that when they are implementing the legislation, they are not going too far and trying to interpret it too much in a way that is not meant by those who have set those rules. The point about the EASA, which was already echoed by the moderator, that was the intention, that when EASA is created, it will take gradually over the tasks of the civil aviation authorities in terms of delivering safety related aspects, as well as certification and so on. It has done a lot when it comes to certification, but of course there is still a lot of duplication taking place, and that is in the hands of the national governments also, and I think in particular the smaller ones to see a lot of benefits of handing over the tasks to EASA. One of the important steps which has been undertaken with the new EASA basic regulation, which has been modernized and currently being discussed between the European Parliament and the Council, is that we want to establish the European AOC, the Air Operation Certificate, which is not the case. Normally you have to have a national certificate, but then you would have the pan-European certificate, and that would be a first step which would also give EASA the kind of rights which it hasn't had before, and might be a good booster to the direction of much more sort of, let's say, European approach for those companies who are operating in the unified European market. Thank you.
Mr. Reinhardt, you had a short...
yeah, thank you. Just to add on, comment on the two previous speakers on the air traffic control workers. I mean, they're great people, great skills, so we do need them, don't misunderstand me, but they do happen to have the best paid jobs in aviation, so as passengers I think we can expect the best possible service as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jan,
yes.
Before you will continue, I just want to say that I will close the possibility to register now, so for last colleagues.
Okay, then we go directly to Mr. Erkki Savisaar.
Thank you. Air connectivity is one of the priorities of Estonian presidency. Well-connected member states are the backbone of European single market. Connectivity has a direct and positive impact on economy, passenger and social cohesion. However, there still exists important air connectivity dispatches between member states. My question is about state aid rules. Are you planning some changes, because many regional airports are unable to achieve sustainable and long-term economic balance without state aid? At the same time, well-connected regions are important for territorial cohesion. Thank you.
Who would like to? Mr. Oleg.
Happy to reply. Thank you very much for the good question. I think this is very much in the heart of the matter, because we are also here this morning discussing about connectivity, and connectivity is something which is essential. And of course, it is very clear that if you are from Germany, you are much better connected than if you come from Malta, because of the geographical location. And these are the facts of life, so to say. But Europe is, of course, interested in having a more coherent approach and also more cohesion as such. So obviously, this is also part of the policies that we are undertaking. Now, the quick reply to your question is that whether we are reviewing the state aid rules, the answer is no. What we have done lately, actually, not long ago, a couple of months ago, was something that didn't really need to review, but through the general exemption rule for the block exemptions, we actually made it possible for the airports which are smaller than 200,000 passengers. So you refer to the small airports. Smaller than 200,000 passengers, basically they are eligible for investment aid and also operating aid without the need for the notification. And we also put the threshold for the airports below 3 million, where the investment aid is also possible. And 50% of the European airports, which is about 420 airports, are below 200,000. And the airports which would of course be with the 3 million passengers, then you get actually quite a high figure in that sense. So a lot of the European airports do have some flexibility. Whether we would see that there is a possibility for an operating aid for airline, then I don't see that this is going to become feasible in a very open market. Yes, the PSOs we talked about, but for the moment, the case needs to be made extremely well so that it would be possible to consider anything else than the current rules. And for the moment, I haven't yet faced a situation where the case has been made so that it would require the opening of the state aid issues related to the operating aid of the airlines, which I don't think is going to happen. But airports, I think, are actually benefiting today already from a far more liberal regime and should also be able to, through that, make themselves more competitive and also compete with each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have to go on a little bit fast. Mr. Letifov.
Thank you. Dear Chair, I'm going to request 2 more minutes for my intervention. As Bulgaria is the next of hold the presidency of Council of European Union, and I have important things to share with you. Thanks. Bulgaria supports of general idea and objectives of the aviation strategy for Europe, as well as the 3 key priorities. We would like to note that these priorities set in the Councils for 18 months program are in line with the priorities presented by the Commission in the aviation strategy for Europe, providing for the adoption of the following 2 legislative proposals. First, proposal for a regulation of the European Parliament and the Council and Common rules in the field of civil aviation and established a European Aviation Safety Agency and repealing regulation EC number 216 of the European Parliament and the Council. Second, proposal for a regulation of the European Parliament and the Council of the protection of competition in air transport and repealing regulation EC number 868. On the first legislative proposal, we would like to say there are indication by the reporter of the dossier, Mr. Marian Marinescu, that the European Parliament is ready to make some concession of the text. The majority of European Union member states have strong reservation of the proposed amendments by the European Parliament. The Council General approach is regarded as the best solution by member states. Bulgaria is ready to support the Estonian presidency in its efforts to reach an agreement with the European Parliament of the new EASA regulation by the end of 2017. Meanwhile, we prefer the delegate acts as well as the provision of prior accreditation of national competent authorities by the agency, community of ATM and ANS services, new name of the agency, using of binding directive by EASA on ATM ANS systems of constitute, carrying out the aviation security inspection by the EASA and financing of the agency through and road charges to be kept out of the text. Furthermore, we see merit in the compulsory emergency assistance mechanism for as long as the put obligation on the agency to provide upon request by a member state necessary technical assistance a respective national competent authority for resolving of the identified definition of performing in the certification oversight and for sent texts. On the second legislative proposal, Bulgaria supports the general idea for introducing an effective instrument that would address the unfair practice by third country air carriers and would secure the competition in international aviation, as well as the connectivity of the European Union with the rest of the world. We will gladly work with the Estonian presidency of the air connectivity and the fair competition package, which might be further discussed during in the Bulgarian presidency. We expect trilogies with the European Parliament of the new regulation 868 to start during in the Bulgarian presidency in the 2018 following in the eventual Council General approach of the Estonian presidency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The time flies again, so we have two more questions from Mr. Clayton Bartolo and Mr. Delgado Arce. Can we have both questions first, and then then I will sort out the questions later on. Is that okay? Mr. Bartolo, would you like to a little bit short, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you have rightly said, the European industry has really revolutionized the world, because yesterday morning I was having breakfast enjoying the Mediterranean Sea, and then yesterday evening I was eating my dinner at the Tuljak enjoying the Baltic Sea. So as you can see, just 2 flights later I was from one end of the EU to the other end. Anyway, as you can understand, Malta is an island, and so we really understand connectivity. And for us it's very important due to the fact that tourism is one of the most important sectors of our economy. And just last year, in fact, we have reached a record milestone of 2 million tourists within a year, and our airport has seen incoming arrivals of more than 2.5 million persons, meaning that more investment is needed. And in fact, at the moment, our airport is going through a 12 million euros investment in order to accommodate more tourists. And also the government is working to introduce new airlines and also new routes that will increase our connectivity. So we can definitely see that the airline industry needs to evolve in order to ensure sustainable growth to EU markets, and also to ensure continuous growth with other countries outside the EU. And one of the things which worries me, and we have heard from Mr. Hololei, that within the coming years, 12% of demand will be unaccommodated. And this, in fact, is quite worrying due to the fact that it will lead to smaller growth in our industry and also possibly a decline in such an important sector, which will inevitably then have a negative multiplier effect on other sectors and other industries. So in this regard, my first question, what are the EU's plans so that this demand will be accommodated and it will not have such a negative impact on our citizens' lives? And my second question, are there any plans to increase connectivity with countries outside the EU? As we have heard, the major growth is in the Asia sector. So what are the plans to increase connectivity with these countries? And also, what are the plans that, for example, let's say a Chinese tourist, he is in Spain, how can he get to Italy within a reasonable time frame? So perhaps Mr. Telka can respond to this using the Intermodal Connectivity Index.
Thank you very much. But we also take Mr. Delgado Arce's question, and then the panel will answer everything.
Good morning, Mr. President. One question which is quite specific, I shall say. The sector of unmanned vehicles, drones, continues to grow and gains importance everywhere inside the EU. We see the need to have a clear norm, efficient regulation, quick regulation, allowing for these kind of works. Some surveys even say that in 10 years' time, or even less, 80% of the air work that today are done by helicopters and small planes will be done with drones for surveillance, emergency pictures, air pictures. So I'm specifically asking the responsible people from the EU, the Commission, when will we have these regulation approved? When do you foresee to have these regulation in force? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to start to answer this question? Mr. Holder?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I will just, first, if I may, very quickly comment also what our Bulgarian colleague said concerning the Bulgarian presidency. And I'm very encouraged that they are taking it very seriously and ready to tackle those issues which are currently in the co-legislative procedure. But I still very much hope that EASA basic regulation, which you referred to, will be adopted during the Estonian presidency. And I still have a lot of hope for that, so that you will not even have to deal with it. Because for us, the sooner the better. And I think that there are all possibilities that we would be able to complete this work in close cooperation between the Council and the European Parliament. Now, the question was also about the growth which might be unaccounted for in the future. Now, I think that I explained before also what are the main measures in order to do that. For example, the development of the single European sky, which you all can contribute to, is definitely one of those possibilities to accommodate this and also to make sure that we were not going to face this situation. The congestion in the skies, you might not see it, you might not feel it, but it is real. And if we are not going to do anything about that, then we are having a situation where really we are not going to be able to fly. So this is the first thing. I mean, we have to have more optimal trajectories of the flights. We have to get ready. We had to get over from this fragmentation of the airspace of Europe. So that's definitely one of the important things. The other thing is also something which is part of the connectivity, and we talked about it. Airports. It's not possible to build an airport today. It's everybody saying it, not in my backyard. Everybody wants to fly. Everybody wants to fly cheap. Nobody wants to have an airport. So where do you want to have those airports? So, I mean, airport investments are something which are on the national competence. Yes, we have the Connecting Europe facility. We have the other possibilities. But the decisions are made on the national level. So the truth is that it takes a lot of time. Infrastructure investments take a lot of time. So if those decisions are not made today, if the exports are not expanded, or you would have a better deployment of the secondary and tertiary airports, then you would face the situation. So this is also something which is part of that. And I think that we need to work very closely together in order to avoid this situation. And the other point was about the global connectivity, which I also referred to earlier. That is why we have the comprehensive agreements. That's why my colleagues are currently negotiating with the ASEAN, which is the fastest growing aviation market in the world for the next 20 years. We want to have a stable relationship based on a contractual arrangement, the comprehensive air service agreement between the EU and the ASEAN countries. 700 million is there, and also the growth is extremely fast. And we have to have a good access to that market. This is just one of those examples. I also listed the other agreements which we are currently negotiating. And negotiating the agreements, creating the predictability for the EU carriers is something, and the whole EU aviation industry is something which we see as the main levers for also guaranteeing the international connectivity as such. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a comment from Mr. Teletsky.
Yes, I'll be very brief. Just one point on EASA vis-à-vis the Bulgarian presidency. First, I also hope, like Henrik, that that will be dealt with still under the Estonian presidency. Not that I would like to avoid splitting it to Bulgarian, but it is doable. It is doable, and it is my understanding also after having spoken to some colleague MEPs that are directly involved, as well as the minister in chair, that by November, in November, we could have a breakthrough. But, and that's why I wanted to return to the point, I mean, you can't approach any negotiations by saying, okay, in the council we have a common position, everyone agrees to it, and that's it. It's like the Parliament would say, well, we have one position in the European Parliament and it has to go through, or that's it. Yeah, that's exactly the problem. And that's exactly, we've got that both in the Parliament. I could, of course, speak here for a number of minutes what the problem on the side of the Parliament is, even among the shadows. But at the same time, the level of flexibility, but also the need to unblock quite often the Council, it has to be among the priorities. Now, on the accommodation of the demand, the easiest answer would be let's implement the aviation strategy. It's all there. I mean, of course, some of the elements are really long-term. Some of them can be tackled in a medium-term perspective. Some of them are there today and are being implemented, and we can be more efficient. I mean, without that and without the understanding that the implementation really lies in the hands of the member states. I mean, the Commission can come with the best possible paper, we can come with the best possible report, we can be in agreement, but the moment we will have the attitude of certain member states or many member states which are basically really blocking movement for all sorts of reasons, different reasons. We have spoken about the single sky. I mean, this is a real problem. And I could name a number. I mean, projects, infrastructure projects. I mean, look at the legislation in a number of member states, including mine, by the way. You know, what does it take to construct a major infrastructure project, regardless of the mode of transport? So I really think that the solution, to a large extent, lies in the member states. Another, let's say, point very much out of the basket that we have not touched upon today, and is related also to what you have said, Chinese tourists from Spain to Italy. We need to improve the comfort of the customers. I mean, today, basically, we do have integrated ticketing, let's say, in the areas of the capital of the member states and some cross-border, but integrated ticketing is another issue. If I will know that that my passenger rights will be guaranteed regardless of the mode of transport, and that I can buy, I mean, now with this iPad, I can buy a ticket, not a flight ticket, but a ticket from which I will move from the hotel here in Tallinn, I mean, to a village somewhere close to Cork in Ireland with 2 or 3 modes of transport with my rights guaranteed. Yes, but where is the problem? I mean, talk to the operators. To talk to the railway operators. There is still this feeling among the operators that if I do it on my own, and in fact, I can still manage because I'm big, I've got the muscles, and I will get the best out of it. So that the lack of understanding, and that's where I would expect also the leadership of the political elite, including yourselves in the member states. The last point, I mean, the air traffic outside the EU, Henrik has answered that, and I would again repeat, we are here to create the regulatory environment and also the contractual basis. Yeah? But again, our airlines need to understand that the market of 500 million is going to be in the future that big only. That the real markets are somewhere else. That we need to expand, yeah? And also diversify, let's say, the economic risks, but also the opportunities. And that, again, will have a positive impact on how we will manage to operate our own internal market. So it is very complex, I agree with you, but again, a lot of that lies in the capitals, and we lack the vision, but also the political courage to decide on some of the issues.
Thank you. Maybe the last comment then from Mr. Hololei.
Yes, thank you. I apologize because I forgot to reply to the question from Spanish colleague related to the remotely piloted aircraft systems, also known as the drones, because this is really a very important element of digitalization of the transport, as well as the using the new opportunities which are being given. I just give you some milestones so that, because you asked about the timetable as well. Last November, we had the Warsaw Declaration based on a big drone conference which took place in Warsaw, where the outcome was part of that declaration that in 2019 we should have the EU regulatory framework in place. Now, this year in May, we made a very important step forward, which is the blueprint. The adoption of the blueprint of the U-Space. The U-Space is a new concept for the airspace where the drones are allowed to fly. And now the next step has been also to integrate that to the ATM master plan, which is the air traffic management master plan, which is kind of the overarching framework also which exists, where the drones have to be factored in. Then, we already talked about many times, the EASA basic regulation, which also includes the section of the drones which creates the framework. And then, if everything goes according to the plans, in 2019, we would have the EU drone regulatory framework in place, and the first drone operation should also take place within the European framework. For us, I would say 3 things are essential, and there will be no bargaining about that: safety, security, and privacy. And this has to be settled before the drone operations in Europe can become a household commodity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I'm going to, I won't take so much time to summarize because we are late. But if I would like to say something, try to unify European aviation industry to one system, because we are competing on a global scale. And if we cannot handle our activities within Europe as a European aviation industry, we will not be so, I'm not so optimistic for the future, actually. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you. My dears, I think it was quite interesting, and I must apologize that something like 30 minutes was longer, but I think these 30 minutes we enjoyed, both speakers and parliamentarians. You made your summarize, and I think for conclusion I will say that topics concerning aviation are still very active. As I said, during our presidency, it's one of our priorities, and it's quite logical because Estonia is peripheral in this area. So I will close this session.